In 2001, Michael Korost lost his truth, his authentic identity, part of his authentic humanity. You see, from an early age, he had a hearing deficiency and he had hearing aids, and it was difficult for him to hear in noisy rooms and particularly to enjoy music. But that last part changed when he was 15 years old and he heard Ravel's Boléro for the first time. And as soon as he fell in love with it. Boléro is simple, it's direct, it's repetitive, it's easy to grasp, it has a clear message, and it became part of his core identity, part of his truth. But then in 2001, cars started to recede, voices got softer. And within 4 hours, Michael Korost couldn't hear anything, much less his beloved Boléro. So he went and he got cochlear implants. And he rushed home, he put on Boléro, he played it, wanted to recover his authentic humanity, and this is what he heard. Now, this is common with cochlear implant patients. You see, cochlear implants bypass the outer ear entirely and send signals directly into the brain. And while he could hear again, Korost couldn't recover his Boléro, couldn't recover his authentic identity. And we're in a similar position as Michael Korost today. You see, the signals coming in were so different. The technology he had adopted caused so much chaos for how his brain could interpret sound. And we're in a similar spot with AI today. While we're rushing to use AI, and especially generative AI recently, as a culture, we're not prepared for the side effects that this technology implies. And we'll look at this in 3 ways today. We'll see how the signals coming in from AI have disrupted authenticity. And then we'll see how Boléro itself talks about the struggle for human authenticity against technology. And then finally, we'll give some clues about how we might recover authenticity. Disruption, a struggle, recovery. First, let's talk about disruption. You see, if you were in a soundproof room, a recording studio, say, things are quite easy, right? Signal comes from over there, there are no echoes, it's very obvious to hear it, it's very clear, and your brain says, there it is. But we don't live in recording studios, right? We live in rooms that are messy, that have echoes, like you are hearing right now, off the chairs, the floors, the ceiling, my hat, wherever it is, right? This means your brain is getting lots of signals all at the same time, and what your brain actually does is it says, there's the first signal. The first one that's just milliseconds ahead of all the others. Your brain says, that is the authentic, true signal. And then everything else, it says, everything else after that must be an echo, a shadow, a false truth. And it filters them out, and you just hear that. But if the signals are disrupted enough, then it's like being in a noisy room with nothing but echoes. And not only is it really hard to know where the sound is coming from, it's difficult to make the sound out at all. And so this is where we find ourselves today, right? Originally, what did we have? We had in our identity space, we had a trusted source, an authentic identity, right? And we saw it and we knew what it was, both in a technical sense and an everyday sense. You met someone, they were in person, they were authentic, you could verify them, they were right there. But as AI and Gen AI have come about, that picture has become muddled with more and more signals. Whether it's disinformation about something they were or they did, or maybe a biometric video or audio recording that looks and sounds like them, but was not something that that person would ever do. Or even more interesting, The rise of agents that people say, I don't want to actually be involved in this community or this communication. I'm going to make my proxy do that for me, right? And so what all of that does is it makes the signals be disrupted, and it's very difficult to tell where that true, authentic signal is. So we've seen how the signals are disrupted. Let's talk about Boléro. And the fact that Korost loved Ravel's Boléro is super appropriate. Now, Ravel wrote this really famous classical piece in the aftermath of World War I. He'd seen the rise of factories and industrialization and warfare technology like machine guns and mustard gas that had wreaked havoc on humanity. And so he writes Boléro with this context, wondering if technology or humanity would win, right? And so he spends 18 minutes building up this conflict for you as the hearer. But he starts Boléro with a single snare drum. It's barely audible. It's playing triplets. And I don't have to play much of this for you, because if you're playing snare drum in Boléro, this is all you play. You have the most boring snare drum part in the entire world, because you sit there for 18 minutes playing triplets. It's like Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven saying, nevermore, nevermore, right? This rhythm starts small but becomes inevitable. It's hard to stop. You think nothing can stop it. But at the same time, Ravel puts a melody representing humanity, started by a single solitary flute. And this is evocative for Ravel of humanity, of the melodies he heard his mother sing to him at bedtime as a child. And while this starts out small with a single quiet snare drum and a single quiet flute, what he does over 18 minutes is he adds instruments on each side, so that by the end of 18 minutes, you have half the orchestra playing the rhythm section and half the orchestra playing the melody, technology versus humanity, and you are stuck in the middle. And remember, it's taken you 18 minutes to get to this point, right? He's built up this sonic atmosphere, and you start wondering to yourself, what's going to win? Is it technology that's going to overrule and eradicate humanity? Is it humanity and authentic humanity that's going to win the day and recover against technology? And the ending of Boléro is amazing and terrifying and brilliant and bewildering and wonderful all at the same time. And I'm not going to play it for you today. I'm going to let you go home and decide what Ravel's message is, and then come find me and I'll buy you a drink and we'll talk about it. It's fascinating. But what he does ultimately in setting up that opposition is he makes you ask questions. What's being ceded to technology? What are we giving control over for? Who's getting credit? Who's getting blame? Who gets to win? Who gets to lose? Who accepts the risk? All of these questions that we need to be asking ourselves about AI as well. And so if I'm juxtaposing AI as technology against authentic humanity, it might benefit us to start with some kind of working definition of authentic humanity. why not use a shorthand that we all know and love, right? If I can abuse philosophy for the next couple minutes, people construct their authentic humanity, their authentic identity around largely one of these things. And there are others. We can talk about it later. We only have a limited amount of time. But say it's something you have, right? Work you've done in the past, standards you've produced, things you've implemented, whatever it is, or stuff you own, you're a materialist. If it's all about what you know, what you can recite, what you know to be true, then you're an intellectual. But most interestingly to me, these days, especially the last 5, 10 years, is the something you are. And I put self-representation. This could be self-determination. This is all about no one outside decides who I am, not my external things. I decide internally, and then I represent that to the world, right? Now, meanwhile, we've had technology going on all the time. AI rising up the last decade or so through Bloom's taxonomy, which is something I grew up with. It tries to identify levels and hierarchy of thinking. And so AI has gone up the stack from mere recall to analysis to eventually, with generative AI, to creation. And all along the way, it's eroded those forms of identity that we may have constructed for ourselves. For example, materialism, something you have. Well, AI has caused large problems recently with data provenance. Who owns stuff you've produced? Think of the New York Times suing OpenAI because OpenAI took all the content from the Times and trained their models on it. Or maybe it's intellectualism, what you know to be true. All you had to do is look at coverage, a recent hurricane coverage, or a political campaign of your choice to find things that are at scale, created to disinform people. And then finally, the one I really want to spend time talking about, I think we have handles on the other two, is surrogacy. What do you mean by surrogacy, you ask? Well, basic definition, it's one appointed to act in place of another, or as we often say, on behalf of. I've had conversation after conversation after conversation over the last year or so about what this means, on behalf of. What does it mean for this system to act on behalf of this person or this other system? And it's a growth edge for all of us. And so with surrogacy, I'm going to bucket into 3 general categories in the time we have. The first is biometric spoofing, and I'm not going to spend any time at this, hardly at all, on this. When I'm in other venues, I talk about cheap fakes and deep fakes and explore Photoshop versus DALL-E and those types of things. But really, they're all cheap fakes these days because I can do them on my phone. Next, tools and creators. And this one's a little bit more interesting. What do I mean by tools and creators? Well, we've all used AI to do different things. And once we do that, we talk about it. And we make choices about what we've done. We tend to say, I created this, right? We're making a choice. Either I'm the creator and AI is the tool, or AI is the creator and humans are something else, right? Oftentimes, it depends on what's being created or what the function of the AI is. But there are other controlling factors. It's not just what's produced, but a controlling principle. What's that controlling principle? It's really subjective, right? If you're creating a horrific self-licking ice cream cone, maybe it's not that important, right? But if you're writing the next great international novel, that's something entirely different. And so we tend to have this really arbitrary, subjective threshold for where we will claim or disavow credit. But the thing is, as we talk about it over time, that line recedes further and further and further back. We're used to using this as a tool. We're used to claiming credit. And words matter. And so that becomes the thing. I'm going to argue today, somewhat controversially, and you can come find me later on, if you're using generative AI, you are not the author. You're not the creator of whatever you've done. You are at best the editor. And I'll go a step further. You're more likely the patron. Think of Leonardo da Vinci and the Medicis, right? What do people not say? They don't say, oh, the Medicis, they were so creative. No, they say Da Vinci. He was creative. He was a master artist. What do they say about the Medicis? Oh, they were so rich. They had so much power, right? And those words, while they do seem like an arbitrary ethical boundary, the ethics of how we use this and how we talk about it is important, not only ethically, but also technically. What we're learning of various studies recently is that there's model collapse in AI generative models. What this means is that there's a limited amount of human-generated content in the world to train these models on. And as you start training it on AI-generated content, well, the probability of probable events goes up and the long tails go down, and models start to collapse. They start to lose functionality. For example, if you had a model that generated pictures of numbers 0 through 9, first generation is pretty much okay. But as you feed the output of that generation to the next generation, to the next model, and to the next model, you start to get not great results. So the researchers concluded that genuine human content, genuine human authenticity, authentic content is essential. So that's tools and creators. Let's talk about recreations now, and this is even a little bit more interesting. This is where people take AI and they blatantly seed authentic humanity to those models. For example, in Cheyenne, Wyoming, in a couple weeks, you can vote for VIC, which stands for Virtually Integrated Citizen. It is an open AI ChatGPT bot that someone has put on the ballot for mayor. When asked why he did this, the man said, well, I think AI could govern humans better than humans can govern humans. So seeding control. A New York Times writer noticed that up to a quarter of the world, according to Gallup, is lonely or very lonely. And so he made a series of AI chatbot-based friends to go and meet this need. Now, they all have backgrounds, they all have histories, and then you chat with them. Presumably you talk to the person at the top right about lifting heavy things, but ultimately, even despite trying to meet a need, it came back to the similar conclusion as our last participants. He said, look, really what this did, it didn't satisfy my need for loneliness. What it did was it drove me to remember what I valued about my real human flesh and blood interaction. If the first one was about seeding control for governance, and this one was about meeting needs, this last example combines control and need as well. This was a young man who had a fiancée named Jessica, and she had a long-term illness. Once she passed away tragically too soon, he decided he wasn't ready for her to go. This was 5, 6 years ago in the early days of Gen AI. And so he took a ChatGPT bot and he fed it her texts and he fed it her emails. And it acted like her and sounded like her, and he talked to it for a year. Is this right or wrong? You can kind of argue both ways. On one hand, it helped him grieve, right? It helped him process. It helped him say goodbye. But on the other hand, the only reason he said goodbye was because it was a one-time charge that he couldn't put more money into. And so his time with her was limited. With all of these cases, we have to ask our questions again, right? The questions that Boléro asks. What's being ceded to technology in each of those functions? What part of authentic humanity is being given over? Who wins? Who loses? If I have AI design something, who takes the risk of that design, of that creation? So Boléro speaks to that, and it describes this struggle for us. I want to leave you, in the time I have left, with some thoughts about how we recover and preserve human authenticity in the face of this struggle. And Korost is yet again a great example. Because it turns out with cochlear implant patients, what happens is while your brain is getting new signals, it remembers this side, what truth actually is, right? Which means it takes these new signals and it rewires the signals coming in to match the truth you remember in your brain. And so after a day, Korost's own voice went back to normal. After a week or two, his closest family members, their voices went back to normal. Music is often one of the last things to come back. But because he remembered his truth, his authentic humanity, after 6 months to a year, he recovered Boléro as well. So that's what we need to do. We need to remember what our authentic humanity truly is and let that guide our actions. A couple thoughts on how. First off, words define reality. Before we rush to use AI or Gen AI on the next technological challenge to save time or whatever else, before we're in that position, we need to document what our approach will be. Write down what you're willing to use AI for, what you're not willing to use AI for, and do it before you're presented with those decisions. It sounds heavy-handed, but it's the only way to think clearly about this. And then secondarily, after you use AI, speak about it accurately, giving credit where tools were used and where your role took a place to play as well. On a group or project level, there are 4 other ways I want to mention. First off is what I would call ethical use. When you're using them for identity and security products, use something like an ethics canvas that force you through those questions that Boléro is asking. What groups are affected? Where is harm done? Where is benefit done? What are the implications? What have I not thought about? Helps you think through those questions. And then the areas I've talked about. If you're interested in data provenance and identifying what is actually truth and true facts, you can participate with the C2PA and its associated organizations, which are cryptographically trying to make ways, standardized ways, to identify what is true and the data provenance of objects, along with helping news outlets document what they're putting out as true and being able to assert that it actually came from them, combating disinformation, which is my next one. My friend Pablo has started an organization called the Disarm Foundation, which is a standardized way to identify disinformation campaigns, talk about it between agencies and governments and responsible parties, and attempt to quell its effect on our humanity. And then finally, surrogacy. And this is part of the motivation of this talk. There's a new group within OpenID called the Death and the Digital Estate, which my friend Dean Sachs helped start recently. And what we're doing there is we're trying to help people control their digital identity, their digital life, and their estate so that they can control that after they're gone, giving people volition of how they want to be respected and how their humanity should be preserved. We'd love to have you come, participate, contribute. We're still in the early stages. We're looking for anyone that wants to safeguard humanity that way as well. Here are the URLs. They'll be in the slides later on. And one more thing, one more way you can do this. When you go home, fly home, drive home this week, find a copy of Boléro. It's easy to find. You're going to have to set across 18 minutes, right? But sit with it. Let it wash over you. Let Ravel ask you his questions. And then think about how AI is affecting your authentic humanity, because it's only with careful thought and intentional, deep time spent thinking about these topics that we have any hope of safeguarding authentic humanity. Thank you.